Hey, you want to know how to protect your assets in the event of divorce? Watch this video and I'm going to show you exactly how to do that. Okay, let's get started. All right, now when it came to putting together this video, I was just thinking about it going, wow, there's going to be some people watching it thinking that's just horrible. You're trying to protect assets and hide them from a spouse. That's not what I'm going to be sharing with you. I'm going to be sharing with you strategies that you can use prior to getting married. So the strategies that I'm going to be talking about here are what we do with our separate assets to prevent you from jeopardizing your separate assets in the event you get married and then you get a subsequent divorce. So nothing I'm going to be talking about now has to do with how do you protect assets during your marriage from getting a divorce. So just to put that out there. Okay, so what am I getting at? And this is a strategy we've actually been using for several years, going back probably 18 years, to help spouses or individuals before they obtain a spouse protect their assets. Because the fear is this, that you come to a new marriage and you bring a lot of assets to that marriage. And then for whatever reason, it doesn't work out. And 15 years later, you find yourself wrapped up in a divorce and a good portion of your assets, maybe it's 50%, maybe it's 70% of those assets are now going to the ex. Now, that is something that no one thinks is fair, right? And would not like to see happen. But the problem is that the courts, they look at the relative assets of each spouse when they're trying to do a fair and equitable division of assets. And they forget that the law used to be, and still is, as far as I know, that separate assets remain separate assets unless you somehow commingle them or you take steps to erase the separateness of those assets, which is really key if you're looking to protect your assets. Now, you're probably aware of using a prenuptial agreement. And a lot of people have done that. They set up prenuptial agreements, but that can be uncomfortable. Sitting down with your spouse and saying, all right, I want to create a document before we get married that states what's mine is mine and maybe what's yours is going to be negotiable that we acquire during marriage. And if you don't want to go through that, then the best way I have found to protect your assets is exactly what the Hyatt heir did, Tony Pritzker, and what's happening in his divorce proceeding right now. How he ensured that his assets are protected from his ex-spouse's claim to get after those separate assets. So what we're referring to here when it comes to protecting your assets is we want to set your assets up so that they maintain their separateness, okay? We want to make sure that they're not going to be commingled, that you can't look at them and say, oh, well, I see what's going on here. He had separate assets, but we can no longer determine if those are truly separate. Maybe they became part of the community because we kept them in our own name, or we used community assets to pay for the bills associated with our separate assets. So here's what you do to protect it. So it's not uncommon. We'll come against somebody, they'll have some real estate, right? So they'll have maybe some rental properties in their own name. So this is an individual I worked with about a year and a half ago. She had some property. She came from a prior divorce and she had some assets from that divorce and she was going to get remarried. Now her concern was that these assets would possibly be exposed to her new spouse if the marriage didn't work out, that possibly she'd lose them in divorce. So she wanted to tie these assets down. So not only she had some properties, she also had a brokerage account and she had some savings. So the way we went about protecting these assets to maintain their separate status is we did like we normally would. We provided asset protection. So I set up some limited liability companies here, set up some LLCs, and I placed each house in each house in a separate limited liability company. So we've transferred all three homes into separate LLCs. Now, I like to use holding companies for anonymity purposes. So I had all of those three LLCs held by a Wyoming LLC. So eventually, once we got these houses transferred in to her structure, the structure then looked something like this. Boom, boom, boom. And she was the member of this Wyoming limited liability company. Now with the cash, we did something similar. We took the cash, because it was a decent amount, we set up a Wyoming LLC number 2 right here. And I put the cash, savings, brokerage account, that type of stuff inside of there. So we took the bulk of her assets that she was going to bring to this new marriage, and we first provided asset protection. Now, you might be thinking, well, why didn't you just do a prenup? Well, she didn't want to talk about a prenup. She thought that was going to be way too uncomfortable to have a discussion. It might create contention. So what she was asking for then is, hey, how do I protect my assets, but how do I also keep them my assets when I get remarried? So stopping right here, if we just stop right here, it's not enough, okay, to keep these assets in LLCs. We need to take it one step further. And so what you want to do then to provide protection for these types of assets then is you need to create a trust. So we set up down here a living trust. Now this could also be a better way to do this would be to create an asset protection trust, a Nevada asset protection trust. We created a living trust, and I explained to her that eventually she may want to consider converting this at some point in time into an asset protection trust because that's going to give her even greater protection. But the idea here is that we set up this trust to own these assets. And so she was a beneficiary of her living trust. So the assets now were titled in the Jane Forrest Living Trust. That's how we titled the assets to the LLCs. The LLCs were held in the Jane Forrest Trust. The LLC held the bank accounts and the properties as follows. So then after that, she gets married to her husband. And so when she got married, I explained, hey, we need to create a joint trust for you and your husband. And so we created a joint living trust over here for her and her husband. And this trust held all of their community assets. Everything they acquired while they're married was going to go into this trust. So assuming they may have other Wyoming LLCs, their joint stuff, all would be held into this trust right here. And so the idea is that we wanted to establish, draw a line that on this side of the line, this stuff over here is personal. She had it before marriage. She set it up in a trust where she was the initial beneficiary, followed by her children when she passed away, and that everything during their subsequent marriage would be over here. Now, the only way in which you can screw this up is that if you take assets from here and you use it to supplement assets over here. So in order to keep this clean and use this type of strategy, you really need to keep all of this self-sufficient with these assets. That means they have to pay for themselves. If you're still in a scenario where you have to cover the mortgage with your wages, things like that, your earnings, that could be a potential that would create cracks in this overall planning. But what we're looking to do is draw a line in the sand and say, hey, before I got married, I structured myself, put my assets into the trust. Those are set up for myself and then my children or my beneficiaries, whoever they are. And I showed that I never had an intent to treat these as a joint asset. And again, using an asset protection trust is one step further. So if you want to learn more about this type of strategy, I'd encourage you to reach out to us to set up a free strategy session. In the show notes, I have a link to do that. You just click on that link. It's absolutely free for that strategy session. And if you like the video, be sure to smash the like button. And if you don't like it because you think I'm trying to hide assets from a spouse, I am not trying to do that. What I'm trying to do is protect assets prior to marriage from a new spouse to make sure what's yours always remains yours. You're always free to commingle it if you want. Take care.